This is the Sequential Six Trak. It's a weird, kind of unassuming synthesizer from the 1980s, from an era where synthesizer companies were trying to cater to the budget market. And despite its unassuming appearance, it has some weird tricks up its sleeve that make it kind of better than a beginner synth. First of all, we have the 6-voice polyphony and a unison mode, which is really cool. We have 99 patches on board. We have an awesome key bed that feels great. And we have the dreaded controls. So instead of stripping down the features of this synthesizer, Sequential said, what if we just made every control one control? And that's what we have here. So despite the immense features that we have on board, which actually rival a lot of their flagship synthesizers of the era, the reason why this was their beginner synth was because of the controls. They had to cheap out on something, and it was the knob per function controllability of the original sequential synthesizers. On this one, we have a bank of parameters, and we have to use one single knob to choose which parameter we want to mess with at once. Now, with the advent of MIDI controllers, because this synth does in fact have MIDI, this functionality got a lot better with time, so I would highly recommend, if you have one of these, use a MIDI controller with it so that you can mess with multiple parameters at the same time. And if Doug DeMuro was a synth guy, he would be all over this thing because it has quite the few quirks and features. First of all, as a quirk, the pitch wheel does not spring back to 0. Which is quite weird. Then we have the fact that it has an onboard sequencer and patch memory, which was pretty cutting edge for 1984. We also have an arpeggiator and this interesting stack mode that I'll get to next. So there were a lot of things about this synth that referenced the name Six Trak. The 6 voices that it has, the 6 tracks for its onboard sequencer that I mentioned, and the fact that you can have up to 6 patches loaded at the same time. Basically, each voice on this synthesizer will be its own patch, which no other synth of the era and few synths since have been able to do. I don't know why they put this feature on this kind of a budget synthesizer, but it made for a really, really unique playing experience. Because with 6 patches, you can do things like this. And I think that's pretty neat. Other than that, this synthesizer is really not special. We have a mono output on the back, we have MIDI, and we have a foot switch. Otherwise, we have a non-detachable power cable and an on-off switch. This synthesizer is incredibly unassuming from the surface, especially because it has so few controls. It almost looks more like a toy or a digital synth. But just like the JX3P of its day, this is a fully fledged synthesizer that sounds fantastic. And despite the controls making it an absolute bear to program, I highly recommend checking one of these things out. The relatively low price compared to something like a Juno, where it might be half the price, actually makes it a pretty good alternative to something like that. Especially if you're going for those really classic 80s synth sounds. The build quality is fantastic. The whole thing is made out of metal and wood. The keys feel great. The only thing I don't like is how sensitive the buttons are. Sometimes they're too sensitive and sometimes they're not sensitive enough. Don't ask me how, I don't know. But everything else about this synthesizer is pretty awesome. Other than the 2 downsides of the programmability and the weird, squishy, whatever this is a fantastic choice of an 80s synthesizer. And there are a lot of people who keep these in their studios as an alternative to something much more expensive because it still sounds great. And it has a character of its own. It sounds just like a lot of other sequential synths of the era. Sitting down with this, you immediately know who made it. But that's enough talking. Let's hear the Six Trak in action.